Trigger warning. Before we begin today's episode, we want to give a gentle heads up. This conversation includes honest discussion around IVF, infertility, miscarriage, and loss. These are deeply personal and emotional topics, and while our goal is to hold space with love and honesty, we understand these subjects may be difficult for some listeners. Please take care of your heart, skip this chapter if you need to, and know that we're sending love to everyone navigating these experiences. You're listening to The Next Chapter is Hers, a podcast about healing, growth, and becoming the main character of your life. We are your hosts, Hannah
and Heather, sisters, storytellers, and your weekly hype women.
Welcome back, main characters.
Welcome back, main characters. Today's episode is all about me.
Today we'll dive deep into Heather and all things that make her the amazing sister, amazing mom, and amazing woman that she is today, and why she was chosen to be part of Hannah & Co. company and so much more. But she is incredible, and I cannot wait for you guys to meet her.
Aw, thanks.
No problem. It's funny, when you're sisters, you don't like compliment each other a lot. So I feel like when you get a compliment from your sister, it's like extra heartwarming.
What are you talking about? You compliment me all the time. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, we do. We're much nicer to each other than I feel like some sisters can be.
Yeah, no, definitely.
On the very first episode that you guys had just listened to, we kind of talked about how Heather was not fully sure about who she was and what direction she was going to go in next.
Nope.
And today we are just going to do a deep dive into who she was before she picked up a camera, who she is as a mom, and all the ways that make her so amazing. So I think we should just dive right in.
Let's go.
I think we should start with like the identity. So much of your life was rooted in motherhood, just like how mine was kind of rooted into business. Like we had two very different paths that we could go down. And it seems like we split at that road and just said like, peace out, see you later. We'll meet up at some point. How has becoming a mother shaped you and how you see yourself?
Well, hard honesty. Right now, my identity, I think, is completely rooted in motherhood. I'm sure many moms feel this way, that, you know, when you have kids, your identity becomes your children. You know what I mean? I see myself in a reflection of my daughter, and it's one of those things that drives me to be a better person because I want her to have obviously the best mom that she can. I also kind of feel like I've lost who I am. I don't know if I actually ever knew who I was.
Motherhood was just being the oldest.
Yeah.
You became the caretaker of everybody.
Yeah.
So it's like you were almost kind of like born into being a mom.
Absolutely. You know, being the oldest of 4 kids, I've always taken on that motherhood role. And I think that's the reason why having my own family and being a mom myself was so important to me. I've just always had that like innate motherhood gene.
Before babies and family life, what were you most passionate about? Who was Heather before a baby blessed your life and made you into a mama?
It's a really hard question for me to answer because when people say they don't know who they are, you know, I feel like it sounds like just like a very surface level response. But at my deepest core, I really don't know who I am. Before I was a mother, I was a wife. Before I was a wife, you know, I've been a photographer for 22 years. And I think that my identity, I guess, has always been, you know, Heather, busy wedding photographer. I didn't really have much time for friends and going out and enjoying my really young years because I was working such a high demand, fast paced job that had me tied up on nights and weekends starting at 18 years old. So I think a lot of that time that you use to build your identity, either, you know, going out and doing stupid stuff, going to the bar and going to the club and, you know, whatever with friends, I think a lot of that was channeled into, you know, being a professional, being a wedding photographer, having, you know, a very, in my opinion, high stress job. And I think that was my identity for so long. And I was always searching for the ability to slow that pace down. But, you know, as the years went by, I feel like it ramped up over a really long period of time. And it wasn't really until COVID happened that I was able to, kind of step back and reflect on the pace of my life and how it had taken me from, 18 to like 38. And I didn't have the ability to like sort of sit back and like breathe that all in until COVID. And, when like the world stopped, I was sort of forced to like look at what path my life was taking. And I made some hard decisions about really stepping back and slowing down my life and wanting to prioritize, motherhood and take it from being something that we were just hoping would happen to really looking at what was going on around us and realizing that there may be bigger issues.
I like to kind of see that difference between us, where I was able to find myself a little bit more building my own business because I had to make decisions and I had to design branding for me and I had to make all these calls for me and my business. And I think that really helped me find myself, where you worked for a big company. So it's like you almost became like a worker bee, or like a, as I like to say, an NPC, a non-player character. Like you went into work mode to make all these people happy for 22 years. And then one day you woke up and you were like, who is Heather? Like,
Yeah.
who am I? And when that decision came for, COVID and the world slowed and you were looking around, the only thing missing from your life was you wanted to take a different path and you wanted to start getting babies.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I've always wanted a family, and my husband and I, Michael, my husband,
snaps for Michael.
My husband, Michael, is the love of my life. He's a wonderful, wonderful man. And, we, like most married couples, we just went off the pill like 6 months before we got married, and we just kind of left it up to fate. And again, I was saying I had such a high stress job. He and I actually worked together. So we both worked crazy, weird hours. And it was just like, it just seemed like it wasn't happening. And I started to question my body. I started to question like, okay, it's been 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Okay, it's been 4 years. It's been 5 years. And at like the 5-year mark, it was like one of those things like, maybe we should see if there's something going on here.
You had to say, okay, we need to come to a solution and go to a doctor and see it. And we're definitely going to get into the IVF journey because that is a huge part of your story.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to go back just a little bit and see what life was like. Like, I don't feel like I ever had that motherly, like I wanted to be a mother at a really young age, but I feel like you did. Can you remember like the earliest memory of what made you want to be a mom and take on this role?
I think, honestly, it was when our sister Emily was born. I was young enough when our brother Ryan was born that like he was just like, I would have been 2 when he was born. So I don't think that he was probably even like a blip on my radar, except for like that he was like an attention remover from me. You know what I mean? But I do vividly remember Emily being born. I remember being old enough to like know that I was getting a sibling. I would have been like probably 6 when she was born. I was born in 83. 89. So I would have been like 6 when she was born. So it was definitely like, okay, we're having a baby. Like it's my baby. I think that's probably where Harlow would be right now. If I had a baby, it would be like her baby. I remember, like there's like all these ways that you're supposed to like soften the kid for when the new baby comes home. There's like all these things, especially now that I see where parents are like, don't be holding the baby when the kid walks in the room. You want to make them important, blah, blah. And I remember that when we walked into the hospital, Mom had presents for us. And I don't think she was holding the baby. She had presents for us. And I remember getting an Easy Bake Oven. And I remember being so excited about this Easy Bake Oven. But I also remember being equally excited about my new baby sister. And I can remember from like a young age, like I always carried her around. And when she started to talk, she would call me Mommy Heather. And those are like, I think the earliest memories that I can think of where motherhood was definitely like deep in my soul. And then of course I was 10 when you were born. So I,
obviously became Mommy Heather to me.
My second child was born. And yeah, you were my little baby. And I remember, even through like your young teenage years, like, all right, Hannah, we're going to go out for the day. And by then, I was, 16,
driving me around,
driving
maybe,
you
your
around.
boyfriend,
Yeah.
going out to the movies, and I literally was like your little adopted child.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I moved out of the house at 18 or 19. So you were still pretty young when I moved out. So, you know, a lot of your middle aged young years, I was not living at home for. But I definitely remember, like, you know, I don't know. You've always seemed like an old soul. So I remember just you being like 12, 13 years old and just thinking you were like my best friend and taking you to concerts.
I was just going to say, do you mean 13 to like 15 years old when you were like taking me out to like Illusions dance bar for like my
like all ages
14th
night
birthday, and we went and saw Slipknot and all these rock concerts together. I remember, I feel like my earliest memory of hanging out with you outside of the house was you looking at me being like, protect your face. And we're like in a mosh pit. And I was like, ah!
I remember you being like probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old, sitting in the back of my Mercury Cougar singing and being like, just like a little
shout out to Disturbed.
It's Disturbed, I think.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
But yeah, I just remember, Down with the Sickness.
Come on, get down with the sickness.
But yeah, you were like a tiny little baby, and I would bring you around like you were my own kid.
And to think that was my very first MySpace song because of you. In honor of Heather, Down with the Sickness was my MySpace song at 16 years old.
Yeah, I was hardcore for a little while.
Weren't we all? We've all had phases. Going back into your family a little bit with the IVF struggle and realizing that you loved your siblings so much. You were mommy Heather to Ryan, Emily, Hannah, all of your little fake baby siblings. How did it feel when you found out that you needed to go through IVF? So
it was a little bit of a process. So after Mike and I were married and we were like working on year 5 of, nothing like spontaneously happening, I went to my OBGYN and I was like, hey, I've been off the pill for a long time and nothing has spontaneously happened. Can we check and see if I'm all good? And so, I've always been a plus size girl. And so we went through all that kind of like medical stuff, and I had a regular period and I didn't have any reason to believe that I wasn't ovulating or wasn't capable of having a baby. But we kind of went down like this like regimented pathway. And it's a little disappointing because as a woman, when you go to see your doctor, obviously, like that's all clusterfuck, period. But when you go to see your doctor and you say like, hey, I'm having troubles conceiving, can we check things out? All of the checking out for very many steps of this process are your fault. The woman's fault, the woman's concern. And it wasn't until we went through all of the steps to check things, to like literally scheduling like a laparoscopic surgery to make sure that I didn't have like a blocked tube, that I literally had to say like, well, can we give my husband a semen analysis and just like make sure that like
he's good,
that he's good too.
That's
and he was
not
like,
all my fault.
Yeah. And he was like, oh yeah, I mean, we can do that. I'm like, okay, before we have surgery, like let's start there. I love my OBGYN. I know that it's just kind of like common practice. Once we got to kind of the end of that list, and then Mike had a semen analysis and we found out that his sperm count was kind of low, he basically, my OBGYN kind of said to me like, hey, so we can either try this, and this, or I can refer you to a fertility doctor. And so I was like, okay, let's just do that, because I am 38. Well, I think I was maybe 37 at the time, but I was like, let's try to cut out a few steps. So we went to the fertility doctor, and literally my first appointment, the doctor was like, hi, you have to lose weight. And it was literally like somebody punched me in the fucking stomach. And I was like, all right, cool. And he was like, at your current BMI, we would not schedule you for a surgery to be put under. So that is step number 1. And I was like, okay. So I took 2019 to work on myself and really try to lose weight and get to where I needed to be to take this next step. The end of 2019, I finally qualified to meet the criteria. And in 2020, we had our first egg retrieval.
Then the world shut down.
Then the world shut down. Yeah. My doctor made the call that, you know, because of our age and our history and because of my husband's low sperm count, you know, that IVF was just kind of the best path. He didn't make us jump through the other hurdles, which typically couples are expected to do IUI, which is just like when they turkey baster you, they just like shoot you up with a whole bunch of sperms.
God, the vivid imagery in my brain right now.
But they kind of said, like, you know, you've been doing that yourself for the last 5 years. So. Oh. I'm kidding. Mike and I made the decision thinking that, you know, IVF was like a sure shot. We wanted to like ensure that even more by having our embryos tested. So our very first round, we ended up having, I think, 7 eggs. 5 of them were mature enough to be inseminated. 3 of them made it to the blast cycle where they're 5 days old. And we sent those 3 embryos off to be tested. Because we just figured that, you know, if we knew we were putting in a viable embryo, we would have a good shot. And my doctor kind of advised against it because he didn't really find it to be necessary because it's an extra out of the pocket expense. But we kind of were like, we want to do this. So of the 3 embryos that we sent off, one of them was completely unviable. One of them was rated as a normal embryo. And because of the type of testing that they do, they also knew that it was a boy. And the other embryo was a girl, and it was considered a mosaic embryo, which meant that there's just little pieces of that, the chromosomes, the genes that were missing. And it is not across the entire embryo. It's just on little parts of it. So our embryo is actually segmental. So it's even more of an anomaly. And I mean, I could talk about this for days because it's like crazy sciencey stuff, but I got really, really, really deep into it during this IVF cycle because I just really wanted to know everything about my options and also like the prognosis for this potential little girl. So because we got a normal embryo, if we had gotten like multiple normal embryos, we kind of could have like chosen what we wanted to implant. But because we only got one, that's the embryo that they implanted first. So
I remember this.
Yeah. So I had my implant scheduled. The testing came back mid-February 2020. We had to wait for my period to come so that they could start the process for a transfer. The beginning of March, I was going to the IVF doctor, getting follow-ups, and my transfer was scheduled for like March 20th or something like that. And I remember going in the week the world ended for blood work, and I heard the whispers of the nurses in the clinic, and they were talking about patients being canceled and transfers being stopped. And I kind of just like froze. I'm like,
everything that you've been waiting for,
my body
is finally in front of you.
Yeah, like within like fingertip distance.
And then COVID is shutting everything down.
And then COVID shut everything down. And it was another really devastating blow to me because I could just like taste it. Like I felt it in my bones that like we were good, we were ready. It was all happening. I know for a lot of people that time was really horrible. But for me, I was really able to let the world stop, really slow down, and like analyze my life, because the wedding industry shut down completely. Quite literally went from working, 60 hours a week, some weeks. It was February, so it was like off season for weddings, but I was still working a full-time job on top of that. But I went from working a full-time 40-hour-a-week job to no job at all, to being able to sit in the sun,
stay at home,
literally listen to the birds, float in a baby pool with you in my backyard,
chase the ice cream man.
The ice cream man came into it was like really bad.
Obviously, this wasn't February anymore either. We've jumped now to the summertime of COVID.
It was a really nice March though. But I just remember like this calmness coming over me. And I actually started a blog. I started really writing about my experience with infertility, writing about my experience with the IVF process so far. Like I said, diving really deep into learning about the mosaic embryo and like what that meant. Was there a future for this embryo? Because as somebody who wants a kid, like you kind of like have hopes and dreams for those cells already. It's so weird when someone like hands you a piece of paper and says, okay, you have 2 cells that are dividing. They're a boy and a girl, and like they are half you and half your husband. And it's like, it's hard.
They're little M babies.
There's my little M babies.
So you had gotten one.
I had gotten one normal. So during COVID, everything was kind of on a pause until I want to say like May or so. And I had done an article. Some writer found my blog, and I did an article in the New York Times. My husband and I were featured just talking about, the disruption of the IVF and the clinical processes that were happening. And so that was like kind of a cool moment. But I got a call in May basically saying like, hey, we're picking back up. Things are going to be working a little bit differently. Everything is a little bit more hands off and no partners are allowed, but we're going to kind of slowly start ramping up. So call us, the first day of your missed period. So June came along, and sometime in June, I called my fertility clinic and said like, hey, it's happening, ready to go. And they got me on the schedule. And I had to do my first transfer without my husband. He was literally not even allowed inside the clinic. I had to get dropped off at the front. And honestly, like, it's like kind of maybe a trauma response. I really don't even remember that whole transfer.
Start like blacking out just to get through it, fight or flight.
Yeah. And again, this was my normal embryo, and I really thought that this was like my sure shot. I had that transfer. Mike picked me up afterwards. I did my little like, okay, I'm pregnant, here we go kind of situation. And 9 days later, I got a positive pregnancy test. And I think you and I were together.
Yeah.
And I got the call, and they said, congratulations, you are technically pregnant, but the number is lower than what we would want it to be. So we're going to keep monitoring you. So it was like immediately like, okay, I'm pregnant, and I don't care what they say. Like maybe it was just late. Maybe it's going to pull through. It's going to be fine. And I went to my follow-up appointment like 2 days later for a blood draw. And they were like, okay, your numbers should be doubling every 24 hours. I think like 40 or 35% rose. And I was still like holding hope out. I think you and I were together the second time that I got a result as well. And it had risen, but it didn't quite rise to the full number that they wanted it to be. And then I think they did another follow-up like a week later, and it had still risen, but it hadn't risen to exactly where they would want it to be.
Double, yeah.
So it was like this weird limbo of being pregnant, kind of, but not really fully understanding like what the outcome was going to be. So I would have been like 6 weeks pregnant at that third blood draw. So they were like, well, your numbers are still rising. We're not holding out hope, but we're going to let you take this ride. Oh,
how did that feel? Like in that moment with them being like, yeah, you're right, you are pregnant, but like you're also kind of not really. Like, do you remember a lot of that, or do you think that was like part of the blackout situation?
I think there was a lot of dissociation there. I think there was also a lot of like toxic positivity from myself, being like, they don't know what they're talking about. Like, I'm pregnant. I've got this baby going. Like, maybe it's just a little behind. I know it's a normal embryo. Like, I think I just wanted to be pregnant so bad that I was just like, they're wrong. This is going to happen. It's going to pull through. It's going to be a miracle. I'm going to surprise everyone. It was just such a weird time in the world. And it was like, it felt like this really good shining glimmer of hope. I was like, they're not going to steal my sparkle.
Yeah.
So what would have probably been like 6.5 weeks pregnant, they scheduled me for an ultrasound. Of course, my husband couldn't be there, wasn't allowed to be there. So I had to go by myself. I think I had you on FaceTime. And I remember being by myself in that room. And my doctor was a really smart man, but he didn't really have a lot of like personable skills. And we did the ultrasound, and he kind of just nonchalantly said like, there's no heartbeat. And there should be a heartbeat at this time. If you look here, you can kind of see that the baby's measuring I don't know, 5 weeks or whatever it was. And so the baby had stopped growing a week and a half before. And he basically said, like, expect to pass the baby. And that's kind of what I was left with, is like, this isn't viable. You can expect a miscarriage. And that was really hard because I was like, we invested all this time and this energy and waiting. And we were given an embryo that was supposed to be like our baby. And we lost it, and that was hard. And then I think it took like another week to actually like go through the process. And that was really, really hard because it was like, I had to wait that whole week to like.
And you had done all that testing. So in your mind, you're thinking it's a perfect baby.
Yeah, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to be a boy mom. I'm like hyping myself up to like
be a boy mom.
To be a boy mom. Of course, because I always wanted a daughter. So, I was just like kind of just projecting my future. And then it all kind of came crashing down. And I ended up miscarrying over my birthday. And strangely enough, our sister Emily had had a miscarriage the year before. And she also miscarried on her birthday.
That's right. I remember this.
Yeah. And then she ended up getting pregnant and then having her daughter also on her birthday. So it was kind of like this full cycle thing. And strangely enough, Harlow was born 5 days before my birthday.
You both got birthday rainbow babies.
Both got birthday rainbow babies. But yeah, that was really devastating, that first loss, because becoming pregnant is such an exciting thing, right? And I already felt like that excitement had been taken away from me because it was like, I didn't just like wake up one day and be like, where's my period? And then think like, maybe I should take a pregnancy test. And then having that moment of like being excited.
Yeah.
I went to a lab, had eggs grown by injecting medications into myself, had it sucked out of me, had it made, had it stuck back in me. So it was like, I knew it was like going to happen or not going to happen. I felt like that was taken from me.
I remember going and hanging out with you and you being like, there's no magic anymore.
No magic. I mean, the magic was gone all those years of trying.
Yeah.
So that was number one. Like the spontaneity, the enjoyment, the pleasure of sex, like gone because it was scheduled and rehearsed and like, I'm ovulating, so we're going to have sex tomorrow, the next day, and the day after that. Or maybe we should skip the day in the middle, build up those babies. So all that magic was stolen. The magic of spontaneously getting pregnant was stolen. And then subsequently, the joy of pregnancy was stolen when I did actually get pregnant, because it was filled with fear and anxiety and trauma, like I know every woman who's experienced a miscarriage feels, because you no longer go into the pregnancy with like this
bright-eyed, bushy-tail feeling.
This like dumb optimism, you know what I mean? That ignorance is bliss. Now you're thinking of every single step. You're thinking of this scan. This is the scan that I was told that it wasn't viable.
And now you're staring at numbers. You're so analytical going into it. I mean, I remember you had an ultrasound wand at home. You were checking
the heartbeat monitor.
Yeah, you were checking all the time at home. It was PTSD. I had a hiccup, but like, oh my God, let me just check my stomach really quick.
Yeah.
Like everything I remember being so heightened in that time. And of course, when you're pregnant, your emotions are already heightened. So the PTSD, I feel like, was tripled.
Yeah. After our failed round, because our other embryo was deemed like broken, I guess I should say, insurance doesn't allow you to do multiple rounds back to back. They call it banking. So if you have embryos in storage, you have to use those embryos up first before you're allowed to like retrieve more. I think like unless you're like a cancer patient or something like that. So, but because we had like marked that embryo off as no bueno, my insurance let me do another round, another retrieval. And so my doctor changed my protocol a little bit. He amped things up a little bit and we ended up kind of diving right back into another round of IVF. And so we went right back into it in August after I miscarried.
This is still 2020, right?
This is
still
still
the same
2020.
year.
So still all the COVID protocols in. Mike couldn't come to any of the visits with me. He couldn't come to anything. We were like checking daily for like updates of like where he was allowed to be. You know, I think for one of the rounds he was allowed to be like in the waiting room, but he couldn't come into the recovery room or into the back. They're never allowed in the actual operating room where they do the like actual like transfer, but they would normally be allowed to be like in the recovery room or with you before you go in and stuff like that.
Would you say that that put a lot of strain on your relationship with him?
I feel like IVF in general took a lot of the connection out of the whole process for both of us. Again, because you're not spontaneously making a child. And it's like he's jerking off into a cup and then handing it to a nurse. And I don't know, it becomes so impersonal anyways, you know what I mean? And just, I don't know, having somebody in the room to like hold my hand before I get wheeled into the transfer, I probably would have made like a big difference, you know? I remember like just being on FaceTime with him and it was just kind of like, I don't know, it just felt removed. I think it's hard for guys to connect with a pregnancy period because it's not happening to their body. But then you put all this in there with it too. And it's just like, it becomes just like a science project.
Yeah.
That you're just like there for.
Yeah.
So we did our second retrieval and this time we had gotten more eggs. I think we got 9 that time. I think we had 7 that were mature and that fertilized. And I think we ended up with 5 embryos from that round. And we decided from that round that we were not going to test them. We decided it didn't really do anything in our favor the first time. We didn't really have the extra couple $1,000s to spend to send those embryos out. So my doctor said, you know, because you had a miscarriage at first and because you're getting older, let's put in 2 of these untested embryos. And I was like, yes, 2 babies at once. Like I was gunning for twins. I was like, one and done, let's do it. So we did a fresh transfer, which means they do it right after the egg retrieval to follow kind of the same process that you would naturally get pregnant in. And they picked our 2 best embryos and put those in. And then we did our 9-day wait and nothing. And both those embryos failed. And you were with me again.
Yeah, we were laying in bed. We actually have the whole thing documented because this was part of your blog. You were getting really deep into writing your story. I was going over every day, poking your butt with all the shots and everything like that. You were writing, we were taking pictures. It really was a beautiful.
I really wanted to document that part of my life because I felt like no matter what, I was going to want to look back on that and remember. Again, saying before that like cameras, documenting things has always been part of my passion. I asked you to document it. And so, yeah, we did. We had some photos of me getting shots. And just before my first transfer was supposed to happen was when I actually had my first boudoir session. So I had asked you as part of this process, I was like, hey, the connection with my body is really missing. And I don't feel like I want to go into a pregnancy hating my body as much as I do for failing me as poorly as it has. You know, you said to me, like, let's do a boudoir session. Let's really like center yourself back. Let's get you back into that place of like loving yourself. And I think that was like the first time in a really long time that I did look at myself with like kinder, softer eyes, you know? And so then when we were going through all this and I asked you to document just like the whole process of the IVF, look back on those and I am really thankful that I have those, even though they're like very sad memories. I had actually taken a pregnancy test myself the day before my official pregnancy test, sort of just to prepare myself for what may come. I didn't really want to be caught off guard and I thought it would sort of save my heart. So you came over that morning and they give you the calls before noon. So we kind of knew like what to expect. And we kind of just went upstairs, laid in bed together.
It's always a nappy nap with your sister that solves everything.
Yeah. Hannah was really obsessed with my super soft mattress. And so that was like her favorite place to snuggle. And so we went upstairs and the call came and, you know, of course they told me, you know, we're really sorry, you know, you're not pregnant. And, yeah, you kind of just documented that for me. And the negative pregnancy test that I received 12 hours ago didn't soften the blow at all. You know what I mean? It was heart-wrenching. And then again, body failed. After that, my doctor and I discussed sort of starting over a little bit. We had noticed that from all the hormones that I was taking that I had developed some little polyps and stuff on my uterus. And so he basically went in there and he like cleaned everything out. Like they did like a full sweep, and we were like, okay, we're going to try one last round with the last 2 embryos that we have. Throughout this whole like process, I was trying to be as strict as possible and as clean as possible. And I wasn't drinking. I wasn't eating chocolate. I wasn't eating sugar. I was living like this very clean, stripped down lifestyle, doing everything that I could possibly. I wasn't wearing perfume. I wasn't wearing deodorant, like all of these things that I thought could potentially be like harming my body. And between the last 2 transfers, I was just kind of like, fuck it. And I remember you and I, we went out a couple nights. I remember having some like espresso martinis, and I was really just trying to like enjoy life again. And Ryan got Mike and I like a night away.
That's right.
Yeah, he got us a stay in Mystic, and we really just tried to like start grounding and reconnecting with each other. You know, it had been a really hard year. So, this last transfer that we did, it ended up happening in October, and we just chucked in the last 2 embryos we had. They're my B grade embryos. They were just like, you know, the okay ones. And I prayed. I took a test the same way that I had with all of my previous transfers before, again, to soften that blow. I remember sitting in bed and getting this pink line and saying to Mike, like, this one's way darker than the last time.
I remember this because you had them like all lined up to each other.
But this one was darker immediately than that first one. And I was like, I'm pregnant. But then again, the fear sets in.
The PTSD.
Because am I going to stay pregnant? Is this the same as the last one? Am I going to get told, well, it's not quite there? So I got a call the next day, and the nurse says, congratulations, you're pregnant. And the numbers look great. And I lost my shit. She was like, we'll see you back in 24 hours for another test. And I was like, okay. And then I went back for another test, and they called me again and they said, congratulations, your numbers have doubled. You're doing great. And I was like, oh my God. And then that next week went by, and they did the 3rd check, and they were like, oh my God, congratulations. Your numbers are excellent. You're pregnant. We're going to schedule your ultrasound. And Mike still wasn't able to come with me. It was October, but they still had some pretty strict guidelines in place. But I remember going into that office and seeing her for the first time. And I was like forever transformed. You know what I mean? And then they graduated me from my IVF clinic. And I mean, at that point, like, it's just like basically like a flashing screen. Like, you can't see anything. There's not even like, it's not even a shape. It's just literally like a heartbeat in cells. But then I remember going to my OBGYN and seeing her for the first time on ultrasound, and she was like a little gummy bear, just like bouncing around. And I'm like forever mad at myself for not taking a video clip of it, because I just didn't think about it. But I remember seeing her like roll over on camera, and she went from being like this little gummy bear facing me to like rolling over, like just seeing her backside, just like this tiny little seed, little tiny nut. It was so weird, but that will forever be engraved in my mind. And yeah, and then I was pregnant.
And now we have the most beautiful angel baby.
Little Harlow.
Little Harlow.
She's about to be 4. It happened so fast.
Science made her perfect.
Science made her perfect.
No, you and Michael made her perfect. She is truly the perfect amount of you and him. She's like a little Powerpuff Girl. Everything sweet and nice dumped into a bucket, and then this like little magical thing popped out. She's an old soul.
Yeah, she is. I definitely, I joke and say that like we got a really good one. We paid a lot of money, but we got a really good one.
It's true. Now, you've gone through all of this. Mm-hmm. You've been feeling like your body's been failing you for years now at this point. This day, when you're watching this little gummy bear bouncing around inside of you, what were you feeling? Were you surprised by how your body handled pregnancy and carried her through full term?
I was so surprised, because I count myself lucky because I literally didn't have a single symptom. I think I like felt nauseous one day. I think there was like one morning where Mike made me eggs and I took a bite and I was like, nope. But I think it literally just happened one time. And I finally felt like I was in the body I was supposed to be in. It's so weird because I was gaining weight, obviously, because I was pregnant, and I ended up being like the heaviest that I had ever been pregnant, obviously. But I felt magical in my pregnant body. I felt at home and at peace. I felt energized. I dressed my body the way I wanted to. I wore like cute, stretchy maternity dresses every single day and like showed off my bump. You know, I didn't have like a perfect bump. I definitely had like a little bee belly, but threw on some shapewear and it looked great. And I truly think that I thrived in my pregnant body. I think it like connected some synapses in my soul that like weren't connected before. And it truly made me like connect myself a little bit more. It gave me a life purpose.
I love that. I feel like, I mean, I can't even imagine, like just hearing you talk about how much your body failed you and now how at home you finally felt. And like body image has always been a really big thing for us. Like, I mean, I feel like body image is a huge thing for so many people. So being so scared of what you see in the mirror every day and then suddenly loving it so much.
I wore a bikini when I was pregnant.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to rock this shit. I was like taking selfies of myself, like sunning out on the deck with my like fat belly. And I was like all about it.
So would you say that this helped make you fall in love with your body a little bit more?
I've always struggled my whole life with my body image, my weight. Even when I was skinny and I was like, you know, 5 pounds away from fitting into this size or that size, it was always like weight was always at like the forefront of every conversation. We've touched on it in episodes before, and I'm sure it will come up again, but you know, it was like an important thing growing up. And I always felt sort of like tied down by what I was weighing. Going into pregnancy, you know, it was a huge concern, but you know, being pregnant and feeling the way that I did really reconnect with my body. And I really did start to appreciate this vessel that was like creating life and carrying life. You know, I did end up having an unplanned C-section, which again, that was the only sort of like hiccup in my pregnancy, but I thank God for it every day because she ended up having the cord wrapped around her neck twice. And so making that decision, you know, saved her life.
We also have all of that on video too, but I feel like we should post your like birth story.
Oh man, that's like a whole other episode. Like came to the hospital to photograph my birth and you know, in like the 18th hour, they were like, nothing is happening. You're not progressing. We have to take you in for a C-section. And after like literally trying everything in the entire world to like get her to descend, I conceded and said, okay. And Hannah elbowed the doctor and was like, what do I have to do to get into that?
I am not missing this chance.
And I have like baby Simba pictures of her coming out.
Just rising from the belly.
And it's, again,
we'll definitely put that in because I feel like that's a full story. Now people watching that are going to have the backstory and the connection to it. They're just, my mom's voice is like playing in my head right now this entire time. Heather, you're a mom.
Yeah.
You're finally a mom.
Oh,
and it's like,
Yeah, because again, delivering a baby during like weird ass COVID times, it was
no
2021.
one could ever be around.
Yeah, it was 2021, and I was only ever allowed one visitor at a time in the hospital. It was crazy. It was crazy having a baby that time. It was crazy going through IVF during that time. I mean, it's a scary world when you have to do all that by yourself.
Yeah.
But back to body image. I mean, I definitely have, you know, unsettled opinion about my body, but my goal is to really get to a place of, you know, neutrality with my body. And I really don't want to pass on body trauma to my daughter. And I think that's my number one goal in life, is to really just try to be as neutral as possible about my body whilst internally, you know, fighting with it. But I don't want my daughter to feel those struggles. And I don't want that to be every conversation in her mind.
Yeah, I agree.
And I've taken that into my boudoir work as well, because that that fundamental struggle with my own body, I really try not to pass that along to clients too. You know what I mean? I don't want to project my insecurities on somebody else's body.
Yeah. So it's crazy because while you're going through all of this with IVF, I am in the process of growing my business. And you watch me build a business rooted in self-love and all around boudoir and loving your body. What was it like witnessing that from the outside, especially during these seasons that were so tough for you of hating your body, fighting your body, and then celebrating it, and then now after you've given birth, going back to that body?
Yeah. I mean, I've always admired your confidence and your just ability to bear it all. You are such a strong, independent leader, businesswoman. And a little part of me has always envied that. I've always said to you, like, I want to be Hannah when I grow up.
Even though I'm 10 years younger.
And it's just, you know, you've got a little bit of something, I think, that I never dared to have. You know, I was very timid, sort of reserved person. And I was always afraid of failing. And so there was a lot of stuff in my life I never tried. And the perfectionism, but also just the fear of failing. And so I just was like, I'm going to just do without, you know what I mean? If I don't try it, I'm not going to fail at it. Therefore, you know, I've succeeded already. You know what I mean? Like, I was totally okay coasting as like a C student. You know what I mean? Like, I just got by. And I feel like, unfortunately, that's like how I've lived a lot of my life. I've just kind of like coasted. I've just let things either go on too long that shouldn't have gone on too long, or never tried things. And I've never given myself the opportunity to soar at something because I've never tried. And I think motherhood was something that I was never scared to try, even though it's like, I've never been a mom before. Like, nothing about that made me fearful. You know what I mean? Just like that first wedding I shot, like I was not afraid. So I dove into motherhood face first.
And then you dove into the studio phase first.
I did. So all that time and reflection and separation from the job that held me captive for so many years gave me this space to realize like that was not my why anymore, that didn't hold all of my hopes and dreams anymore. And although I love wedding days and I love photographing weddings, especially like intimate weddings, I didn't love everything else that went into it. It didn't bring me joy anymore.
Would you say photographing boudoir brings you joy now?
Yes, it does. And any of my brides that are listening, please know that your wedding days brought me joy. For real. Please know that they brought me joy. And so when you this time said, I think you should join the studio. And I was
begging her for years to join the studio.
Just leave weddings. Just come to me. And I was like,
join the dark side.
And then that last time that you were like, I think you should work at the studio. And I was like, yes. And you were like, really?
I know. I didn't believe you at first.
I was like, I think I'm ready for it. I think that that's where my path leads me. And it does. It brings me so much joy. It brings me so much fulfillment. It like refills my soul. Seeing women, I think part of it is selfishly the gold stars that my love language is receiving, you know, affirmation. And I think especially with those reveals that happen in person after the session, and seeing women go from the morning they arrive and sit down in the chair and telling me how nervous they are and how like, oh, I'm so scared. Like, I'm so nervous.
You must like relate to them.
Oh,
you're
yeah.
Like, I've been here.
Yeah.
I've been in your shoes before.
Yeah. And then at the end of it, they look at the pictures and they're like, holy shit, that's me. And I'm like, yeah, babe, that's you. Unfiltered, unedited. Just here's the back of my camera. This is what you look like. And people are like floored. And I get that positive reinforcement of, you know, their reaction, but also I can literally see in their faces that like they are changed. And the same thing that happened to me, seeing themselves in a softer, kinder eyes, like they are able to kind of regain this whole new sense about their body. And yeah, I feel very powerful and very connected and very emotional. And like I said, I think that it's really feeding back into my soul and making me feel like a little bit more purposeful and something other than just a mom.
Yeah. Now, what would you tell another woman, especially mothers, who feel like they've lost themselves and taken care of everyone else? What is a little advice you'd give to them?
Take the time for you. whatever it is, this year in particular, I said to myself, this is going to be my me year. I'm entering 42. Again, still having this internal struggle with my body. And I don't feel like I've ever really given myself the time for myself. So book the massage, book the facial, get your nails done. It doesn't have to be all money things, but go sit in a park and read a book. Listen to a podcast. Make time for yourself. Make time for your spouse. I think that that's something that my husband and I have also been focusing on this year, is bringing the passion and the romance back into our marriage, because so much of it was stripped away through this IVF process and then early parenthood. So we're kind of bringing the passion back in our 40s. But yeah, make time for yourself, make time for your partner, and don't be afraid of who you could be, because there's a lot of potential out there for you, and you just have to do a little digging and finding. And I'm definitely not the end all be all on that, because I'm certainly just finding myself. But I mean, this month like the last 6 weeks, I have had a massage. I have had a facial. I have gotten my nails done. I started wearing jewelry, dressing up. Being on this podcast is hard because it's like I have to find an outfit for every time we film, and I can't just be in loungewear. So I've been, just spend a little time on yourself, spend a little energy on yourself.
I love that. I think that's great advice. And now probably the hardest question of them all. If you could go back to your younger self during one of the hardest chapters, what would you say to little Heather?
I think sometimes I'm toxically positive to myself, but I think I would tell myself to be patient and to be kinder to yourself, because in the end, it will all work itself out for the right timing. I look back now and I think if I had had children when Mike and I started wanting to have children, my child would be significantly older than all of her cousins. As I mentioned before, Emily, our sister, had a baby the year before Harlow was born, and then Harlow came along. And then the very following year, on Harlow's birthday, Emily had another son. And then my sister-in-law had a baby the following year. So Harlow is literally surrounded by cousins
that are all a year apart.
5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. There's not a 1-year-old, but she'll be 2. So she has a really close relationship with her cousins. I feel like we all got to be mothers together. We all get to mother each other's children. We all get to care for each other's children. To me, that's a huge deal, because my husband and I are older. We don't know if we're going to have another child. We do still have that embryo on ice that, I think about daily. Part of me really wants to try for it. But then if it fails, I feel like I'm at that point in my life where I don't know if I would do another round, and
it's scary to take that leap.
Yeah. And maybe that's the part of me that if I don't try, I won't fail.
Yeah.
Because
you have to conquer now.
So as long as she's on ice, there's a potential for me to have another baby. But if she's not, then maybe it won't happen. But yeah. So it's really important to me that she's surrounded by all these cousins and, grows up in a big family with lots of people around her. So I would tell myself to be kind and patient, because it will happen.
Trust the process, trust the timing.
Yeah.
It's not a good podcast till someone cries, as I always say. I think that this was a beautiful conversation.
Thank you.
I hope that you continue to look at yourself with kinder eyes every day. And you continue to pass that on, because the love that you provide to Harlow is the same love that you deserve. And sometimes we have to almost kind of raise ourselves like we're raising another human, right? It takes a lot of women and a lot of people having a child and being the one to say, I want this child's life to be different. But we have that inside of us, and that choice inside of us to make our lives different too. So every day that you're saying, I want to change my life for Harlow, think about yourself too. Think about what baby Heather needs. We are going to end the episode there, because there are so many more episodes to come. We're going to dive deeper into everything that we've talked about. We're going to experience this with other women who have been going through it. We have an amazing guest list coming up for the next couple of weeks. And our story is just getting started.
Yeah.
So thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. I'm proud of you too.
And that's today's episode, guys. We cannot wait to have you guys back next week. Bye, main characters. Bye. A quick blessing before we go. May your mirror be kind, your coffee be strong, and your confidence slightly delusional.
You are the main character, the muse, and the movement.
We'll see you next chapter, babe.